All right, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I have a very interesting video for you guys today about carb cycling and how it can help you get under 10% body fat, who should use it, who shouldn't use it. We're going to do a very comprehensive breakdown today on everything you need to know about carb cycling, how it can help you get shredded, aka under 10% body fat without the typical side effects, but also who should and shouldn't use it, how I've personally used it, and how I currently actually use it, and why I've used it to solve plateaus and solve low energy, bloating, and other issues that people often get. So you will benefit from this video if you've been training hard, eating clean, getting to a relatively advanced level where you're starting to see your abs, but you're starting to feel tired, flat, bloated, or even getting more serious side effects like, accelerated hair loss, anger, depression, emotional issues, instability in your mood, libido issues, especially under 10% body fat. Like 15% body fat, you're very unlikely to get this. 12% body fat, the likelihood does start to increase, especially if you're using a low fat strategy and not getting in your healthy fats and omega-3s. But especially once you get under 10% body fat, we often have to increase your fats to a larger percentage of your dietary intake and utilize carb cycling to make sure you're getting the right healthy fats you need now that you don't really have a whole lot of fats on your body, which is a good problem to have because when you have so little fat on your body that you actually have to eat more fat, but you can still get results, then it's, honestly an amazing situation because you're shredded, mashallah. But yeah, as you get closer to sub 10% body fat, this might be a game changer for you. Like I said, as early as 12 to 15%, you might need it, especially if you start to hit a plateau after your first 20 to 30 pounds of fat loss or any of the symptoms I just outlined as you're getting very lean. So in this video, I'm going to break down how to use carb cycling properly, what are the hormonal and metabolic benefits, who should not do it to where it would be counterproductive or too complicated or overwhelming, and then how I use it personally versus how I use it with clients, and how it's helped me to get photo shoot shredded. I should have included some visuals, but I'm sure you guys have seen. Maybe I'll put it on the thumbnail, picture me looking all shredded, to get as lean as possible while still performing my best and avoiding the side effects, the negative side effects above, and satisfying the various food cravings and flavors that I desire. So what is carb cycling? Essentially what you do is you vary your carb and fat intake based on your training needs while keeping your protein high. So typically on a training day where you need more carbs, especially if you're doing something athletic like boxing or basketball, your carbs are going to be higher and your fats are going to be lower versus on the days where you're resting and not really doing much, or you have an easier lifting session where you don't really need a lot of carbs for, or a muscle that's not that important to you. So for me, for instance, leg day, ironically, some people, they got to go extra carbs on leg day because they're really pushing performance. But for me, leg day is about functionality and maintenance, but I'm not trying to push massive squat PRs or deadlift PRs per se anymore. So I really don't need a whole lot of carbs for leg day. Ironically, even on back day, I don't really need as much carbs. But definitely chest day and shoulder day and arm day, I like to have a lot of carbs in my system, though I've been able to get a good arm pump without a whole lot of carbs in my system. And then for boxing, definitely need carbs. But again, this is not a keto diet. This is not a no carb diet, and it's definitely not magic either. You still have to be in a deficit. And really, you want to think of carb cycling as a strategic way to time your nutrition to optimize your daily needs across what activities you do in the day, what types of activities, what performance demands does that activity have? Is your heart rate going to be up for a lot of it, and you need to do explosive movements with a lot of endurance and everything like boxing or basketball? You definitely need carbs in your system. Versus if not, you may not need a lot of carbs in your system. It's also going to help you optimize for recovery, digestion, water retention, energy levels, insulin sensitivity, food cravings, hormones. So I'll show you like the use cases where it can help address all of these things while still staying in a calorie deficit and getting the metabolic benefits of complex carbs and the various benefits of healthy fats, which I'm going to outline for you today. So what my weekly carb and fat split looks like on a cutting diet where I start doing carb cycling, which again, for me, right around like that, sub 12% body fat is where this becomes pretty critical for me because I like to keep my carbs pretty high, especially on training days when I'm cutting, which means my fats have to be quite low, 45 to 55, usually on the lower end of that. And honestly, I'm pretty extreme when I'm doing this to where sometimes I undereat my fats and I go below 45, which can potentially be detrimental if you do it for too long, especially when you get really lean. Like if you're like 20% body fat, you could go under 45 grams and probably not get a whole lot of issues because you got plenty of body fat for your body to use for its fat needs. Just make sure you're always taking your omega-3s or consuming fish because that's the most important one for your hair, your skin, your nails, your recovery, lowering inflammation. But other than that, I mean, like you don't need to be consuming a crazy amount of saturated fat if you have all that body fat on your body. But as you get leaner, you definitely need it. So what I typically do is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are training days for me where I'm lifting and I'm doing about 15 to 20K steps if I'm on a cutting diet and I'm in a cutting phase, right? If I'm getting photo shoot shredded. So I need the protein for recovery. I mean, the protein stays pretty consistent across all of them, and I should have put 250 plus because sometimes I'll go as high as 325. But there's above 325, there's no extra benefit, and below 250, especially multiple days in a row, my recovery starts to diminish. So I actually need 250. Even when I've been as light as like 192, I usually need 250. There's been only a few phases of my life where I needed less than that to get optimal results. Now, carbs, I usually like to keep them at 225 to 250, which is pretty high compared to like most of my clients. However, there are actually plenty of guys who are my size who can actually eat a lot more than this and still shred because their metabolism is faster for various reasons, even though their body composition and age are right around the same as mine. And Allahumma barak. You know, I know one brother actually who cuts on like 3,400 calories, and he's like very similar stats to me. And as far as I know, he's natural. I mean, he seems natural to me, even though he has a crazy physique. He's been training for 20 years, mashallah. So Allahumma barak. And I also know guys who are not natural who cut on 2,700, even though they're like way bigger than me. So it's interesting how the metabolisms are so different across different people. But not to go on too much of a tangent, 2,500 is roughly my calories when I'm, you know, doing 2 to 3 pounds a week of fat loss with these stats here. And then Thursday, I take a rest day. I actually take 2 rest days, Thursday, Friday, because I got my boxing on Saturday. So what I do is I do low carb on Thursday. And this is where I satisfy a lot of my cravings for fattier foods like eggs, you know, steak, avocados. I'll eat a lot of that because usually my carbs are low. And sometimes I'll go even below 100 grams on this day. I just clean out. And sometimes I'll go a little bit higher on that Wednesday just to really load those carbs, especially if I'm fatigued after Monday, Tuesday training in a row. And I sometimes will go a bit lower than my usual deficit here because, especially if I go lower on carbs, even if I go a bit higher in fats. Like, for instance, yesterday was Thursday, and I'll tell you guys exactly what my macros were. Yesterday, I literally consumed, if this thing could just load faster, there we go. I literally consumed yesterday 2,349 calories, 268 grams of protein, only 65 grams of carbs, but I went 104 in fats. Now, if I went 104 in fats with 250 carbs, I would probably gain some fat that day versus, you know, between the ribeye and the New York steak. Again, this is actually my first high fat day of this cut. So I definitely went hard with it, but I lowered the carbs to compensate. I'm going to explain why you have to do that in a second. I've explained in other videos why when your carbs are high, your fats have to be lower and vice versa, but I'll explain it in depth today. But essentially, usually I will keep it a little more under control. Again, I just got excited yesterday, so I said, hey, I'm just going to go a bit lower in carbs and really have a party, but I still stuck to my calorie deficit. I still only ate 2,349, which is right in the middle of this range, and I still got 20K steps, so I was still in a solid deficit for the day, despite going over on fats. And I went over on protein, but there's really no problem with going over on protein as long as you don't have kidney disease. If you have kidney disease or any kind of organ disease, always check with your doctor before doing any stuff. In fact, before doing anything you read on the internet or learn on the internet, always check with your doctor. But again, we have lots of doctors as clients, so I guess they can check with themselves. Anyways, all jokes aside, although we do have a lot of doctors as clients, alhamdulillah. Friday, what I then do is I carb back up, okay? But it's basically the same diet that I eat on my training days, but it's a non-training day. And I actually go a bit lower in steps just so that for my boxing day, my performance is optimized. Because if I show up to boxing sore from lifting or doing a lot of steps, it really reduces my performance. And boxing, I'm really trying to bring my best. And I do boxing a little bit like after my lifting days, but this is my dedicated boxing day where I go super hard and train with a world champion who pushes me beyond my limits. Now, on my boxing day, I get a deep tissue massage afterwards and I have my cheat meal in the evening. And in my cheat meal, I get quite a bit of fats. So I'm usually hitting about 3,000 calories that day. Even if I don't track my cheat meal, this is roughly what I estimate. Sometimes it has 3,500. And usually during the day, obviously I get carbs before boxing and, you know, a bit of protein. After boxing, I get a bit of protein, a bit of carbs, but I actually keep my calories a little bit lower before the cheat meal. While kind of just getting a lot of protein, just to make sure that I do damage control versus when I'm in maintenance mode, I don't do any sort of damage control before cheat meal. And usually the cravings are not as bad on cheat meal, so I don't even go as overboard anyways. Then Sunday, I do a little bit lower carbs just to clean out the bloat from the cheat meal. So I go 250 protein, 100 carbs, 60 fats. So it's a bit more of a deficit, especially because my metabolism just got supercharged from the cheat meal. And then boxing burns a lot of calories too. And then Monday is usually my leg day. So it's okay for me to not have a whole lot of carbs the day before because I don't need that much carbs for legs. I'm not really pushing that hard, but I do leverage legs to get me more insulin sensitive so that I can eat more carbs that day. So I'm carbed up for chest day, which is usually Tuesday. And then back day is usually Wednesday. With shoulders and arms and all that stuff. And again, I have an interesting split. I can do a video on that soon. I also have other videos on the various splits I recommend for clients. But do you have to do it the exact same way I do? No. I'm going to give a very simplified example. I actually have a client who's around 1,800 who I'm about to put on carb cycling because he's getting into that like 10 to 12% body fat territory, and I've had his fats pretty low, and I want to make sure that it's a smooth and easy transition for him. Of course, he's had a cheat meal every week where he's getting in his fats, but I want to, and he did have a week where he overate his fats when he was about like 12 to 14% body fat. So I wasn't too worried about it. But now that we're getting into that sub 12%, he's already lost just under 20 pounds, like about 19 pounds. I definitely want to get him eating more fast and doing some carb cycling. But of course, with him, he plays a lot of basketball. So I've had to keep his carbs relatively high compared to most people. And sometimes his calories have been quite a bit above 1800 because he's playing so much basketball at a high level. Mashallah, Allahumma barik. So, but in a simplified example, where somebody's not necessarily playing basketball, they're just lifting, you might be doing 150 carbs, 200 protein, 45 fats. You might be going as high as 200 carbs. You might be going as low as 150 protein, but I just want to give a very simplified example here. On a non-lifting day for this person, they might do 100 carbs, 200 protein, 60 fats. And if they want a keto style day, which sometimes I've done with like people who were diabetic, who really wanted to nuke down the A1C a little bit faster, although being in a deficit overall is going to help with your A1C. Losing weight and body fat overall is going to lower your A1C. Lifting overall is going to lower your A1C. And I have a whole video where I go deep into diabetes with case studies and how to basically reverse type 2 diabetes. It's a great video. Check it out if you're somebody who that's relevant to. But I think a lot of people watching this video are going to be more so advanced people interested in carb cycling. But if somebody does want keto style days, technically keto is supposed to be under 30 grams of carbs, but it's a keto style day because it's more of a cyclic ketosis thing. We're not actually going into a full-on ketosis. So I would be putting their carbs around 0 to 50 or under 30 if they're actually trying to do keto. 200 protein still, even though keto says don't do high protein. High protein keto works so much better than high fat keto for like actually recovering and having a great body composition. And then fats might be as high as 70 to 90. Now, there are many ways to do it, but the principle is if it's a day where you need carbs, then you definitely, because you're lifting, boxing, or whatever, then you definitely want to get the carbs in, right? If there's a day where you need to go higher in fats because you have a family gathering and it's not your cheat meal, or if it is a cheat meal, we might go a bit lower on carbs throughout the day until that cheat meal. And if it's a non-cheat meal family function, then we might just go lower on carbs the whole day, right? So there's very different ways to use this based on the person and their activity levels, the types of activity they're doing, and what other things we need to work around. But it's very easy to offset and periodize your carbs and fats accordingly. And I'll explain like how to go up and down with carbs and fats and why you need to, have higher carbs on lower fat days and higher fats on lower carb days, and vice versa. Now, additionally, like I said, if somebody's been chronically on low fats and they've gotten to a very low body fat percentage, sometimes you got to refeed your fats because your body doesn't have enough fat in its system to perform a lot of the functions. And you'll know that if your libido is going down, if you haven't been taking your omega-3s and you're seeing accelerated hair loss that can't be attributed to anything else, etc., then we would definitely need to refeed your fats and maybe not have them so low, especially you enter the next phase of the cut, or just do carb cycling so you're loading your fats on one of the days, but also not going too low on the other days, and always getting your omega-3s. Super important. That's why I always make people take omega-3s, especially as they get leaner, but usually throughout the whole process if they're not getting enough fish in their diet. Now, I'm going to go into one more example, which is what's called the cyclic ketosis diet. I actually did this like 13 years ago for the first time, and it was cool, but I did make some mistakes, which is that I would eat junk on the weekends. Because, at that point in my life, the idea of eating low fat sounded unfathomable to me. I was like, how can I get my fat so low? And now it actually is so easy because I've built the skill sets. But at that time, I was like, how am I going to keep my fats low? And I kind of just saw it as like a cheat weekend and just don't eat carbs during the week and cheat on the weekends. And I did get some results because I was young enough that my metabolism was very fast. But, these days that would definitely not work. I would mess myself up and be spinning my wheels, getting zero results, probably gaining fat. But the right way to do it is if you go Monday through Friday on keto, so under 30 grams of carbs, adjust your fats and proteins accordingly with your needs, and then Saturday, Sunday, you go low fat, you get your carbs in, you do medium protein. This works really well, and the reason why you do medium protein, I almost always have people do high protein, but in this case, you're loading carbs, and carbs are protein sparing, so you can go a bit lower in protein, and it's fine. And this gives you a nice refeed, and this usually works well for people whose bodies can actually utilize those carbs days later. Like some people are fast carb oxidizers. They have to eat carbs right before the workout, right after the workout, the night before the workout, otherwise they're going to go flat. Some people are slow carb oxidizers. They could eat carbs the night before and not eat any carbs for 24 hours, 36 hours, and still have amazing muscular fullness and be able to get a great pump. Now, the benefit of being a fast carb oxidizer is even though you have to eat carbs more often to have muscular fullness and good performance, is that your metabolism is generally faster versus the upside, obviously, to somebody who's a slower carb oxidizer. You don't have to eat as much carbs that day or really even in the day before to have good fullness and performance, but the downside is typically the metabolism is slower. So there's always pluses and minuses. Allah has blessed us all with different pros and cons, but the point is, if you are somebody who's a slow carb oxidizer, you could potentially use this, and just that weekend carb up could be all the carbs you need. Or you could also go, you can do high carb days, medium carb days, low carb days, and you can just go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Or you can go, normal carb, double carb, half carb, no carb. This is a very flexible strategy. You adjust it based on what amount of activity you need. Like if it's a muscle you don't care that much about, where you don't need crazy performance, then you can go lower carbs, half carb, or no carb. If it's, your most important muscle is your chest day and you can't stand the idea of your bench press going down on a cut, which I totally understand because I'm the same way, then, get your double carbs on that day. Just don't make yourself lethargic. Give yourself enough digestion time before the session, or it can backfire and make you too lethargic to perform, right? But as long as you're in a deficit, you're going to lose body fat. And that's like one big point that I want to tie it in with at the end here, is that we don't want to make it overly complicated, right? For most beginners, you're really not going to need this, okay? And so that ties into the next slide, which is that who should not use carb cycling? Beginners. If you're still learning about how calories and protein work, or you're a newbie when it comes to dieting, you should just keep it as simple as possible, because you really don't need to do anything crazy or more complicated or complex like carb cycling to get amazing results. Like majority of my clients who had amazing results, amazing case studies, even the ones who got absolutely shredded like Brother Safe, did not have to do carb cycling, right? It's really more so for the advanced people who, might have very high activity level sport demands, boxing, basketball, whatever it might be, who might need to do some form of carb cycling as they start to get below 12% body fat in certain cases, right? So it really depends on the person. So if you're a total beginner, or you're a newbie at dieting, just get results by optimizing your calories and protein first. You should be able to lose your first 20, 30 pounds, no problem. And then later, once you got the hang of it and this is very second nature to you, then you could do carb cycling, and it'll be a nice tool in the toolbox that you can use to satisfy your cravings, work around certain days where you need more carbs and certain days where you don't need as much carbs, to drop bloating if you're getting really bloated from eating so many carbs. Even complex carbs can eventually make you bloated, especially for some people who are very prone to it, etc., or boost your insulin sensitivity a bit faster. Okay, if you have disordered eating or binge restrict cycles, this may potentially trigger some problems. And I wouldn't say I fall in this category, but I might be borderline in this category. I know I can eat a lot, and that I definitely, when I'm stressed out, tend to eat a lot. So for me, and I could definitely easily overeat. So this is definitely something to be mindful of as well if you struggle with self-control. But alhamdulillah, this is a skill set you can build just like how I built it. If I can build it, you can build it. If you're inconsistent with training and diet, adding this complexity is just going to make things worse. Get consistent first. Master your foundations before you go into these more advanced principles. And if you're just looking for a shortcut without building discipline, learning the foundational principles, you got to fix that first. See my other content on this first so you can get the fundamentals down. So again, there's a lot of people who should not do carb cycling, and who it just makes it needlessly complex for, because then you have to eat different things each day, versus if you eat the same thing every day, it's a lot more simple and you can get a lot of results that way, and that's really sufficient for most people. The only people who we really need carb cycling for is like more intermediate to advanced dieters who have mastered the basics, but you need the extra edge to get below 12 to 15% body fat and get to that sub 10% without hormonal issues, metabolic issues, or performance issues. If you're training 3 to 5 days a week, who need to get carbs on certain days but want to get more healthy fats on the rest days, or eat higher fat foods with your family, this can work very well as well, right? If you've hit a fat loss plateau despite doing things properly to this point, usually reverse diet is better for you. See my video on this, but for some people it could help break the plateau. If you're a high-performing Muslim professional who wants to stay sharp and lean and periodize your nutrients according to your physical and mental needs, you can. But again, if you have a lot of demands in other areas of life, you might want a more simple diet strategy. And if you're a busy Muslim parent who wants discipline and flexibility, again, if you're a beginner, you should just have a simple system. But for some people, it can work well. Usually, intermediate advanced is going to be the key. Or if you have the symptoms I was speaking of earlier, as you get under 12% body fat, like hair loss, anger, depression, emotional issues, libido issues that cannot be attributed to anything else, as you get super lean, that's when getting in healthy fats on your higher fat days and maybe adjusting your macros overall can be very beneficial. So let's talk about some more of the benefits, right? Obviously, we talked about, aligning your fuel with performance. You get more carbs when you need to train hard and fewer when you're resting or training not as hard. High carb days are very important for recovery, refueling your glycogen and reducing your cortisol, especially those of you who are on a lower carb diet. You definitely need to mix in some high carb diets. Some high carb days, or just don't do the low carb diet, create the deficit in other ways. When you get carbs in, this also helps to prevent metabolic adaptation, right? So, this is a strategy, not just the carbs itself. So when you alternate your intake, yes, so carbs are going to help to stimulate your thyroid. Leptin can be stimulated from a higher carb or a higher fat meal, higher calories in general, more satiating foods. But obviously, you don't want to just be on chronic starvation. So that's why the cheat meal or a refeed of any kind can be beneficial, whether it's refeeding carbs, in some cases refeeding fats, doing a cheat meal. There's a lot of ways to keep your leptin higher, which upregulates testosterone, thyroid, everything. Digestion. Digestion is actually, as I mentioned before, like some people can get very bloated from eating a lot of carbs, a lot of starches. So this can help to reduce that, and it can also help drop some inflammation if you're getting bloated from a lot of carbs. But some people don't get bloated from carbs at all, so it depends on the person, right? This, even though it does require some structure and planning and it can be a bit complex, it also does allow you some flexibility. And it's interesting because, like, for me, yesterday I went crazy with the steak and the eggs and avocado because I haven't had that in like 4 weeks that I've been shredding, right? But so you can do that without derailing fat loss while being in equal deficit like I was yesterday. And obviously, as I mentioned, you know, on the high carb days, when you're carbing up, you're going to retain more muscle, get better recovery, keep your metabolism fast. On those days where you keep fat low and protein high. So again, to go a bit deeper, the benefit of the high carb days specifically is that you replenish glycogen for better strength, performance, and pump. You lower your cortisol and calm your nervous system down, which is going to help with sleep quality. You boost your thyroid and your leptin to help keep your metabolism optimized and reduce hunger, right? Your sleep's going to be better, and it actually helps with melatonin production. It's going to help with your mood. Although going too low in fats can also mess with your mood, so I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then, as I mentioned, muscle retention, carbs or proteins preserving, so it's going to preserve your lean tissue during your cut. Now, here's the part that you probably haven't heard as much about from me, because I'm always talking about the benefits of going lower fat, because most people do not undereat their fats. But this video, again, is more tailored to the advanced people who might be undereating their fats because they're, you know, really shredding on the typical strategies I talk about. Now, the benefit of getting some fats in on your lower carb days is that it's going, so number one, the first benefit doesn't actually have to do with the fats, it has to do more with the low carbs, which is that your insulin sensitivity goes up on the days where you have lower carbs. So your insulin receptors are going to reset, future carbs are more effective, and you will rapidly improve your insulin sensitivity, your blood sugar, and your A1C, which can be great for getting some quicker wins for somebody trying to reverse diabetes, or somebody who's just been eating so many carbs and their body's becoming a bit resistant to it for whatever reason, just from the sheer volume of it. Now, another interesting fact is that when you consume dietary fats, your body does have to produce bile to actually digest it. And so this is going to help with detoxing, digestion, and obviously, you know, you do need to get some fats in even on your low fat days to help with fat soluble vitamin absorption. Fats, especially when we're talking eggs, fish, avocado, etc., is going to give you cholesterol, which helps you to produce testosterone. And keep your mood stable, and can also help to boost your HGH production. And then omega-3s, especially as I've told you guys, but also you want to incorporate in like black seed oil, egg yolks. This can help to support skin elasticity, hair and nail strength, and reduce your systemic inflammation, and can even boost recovery. Now, high protein is always a requirement every single day, and you've seen that on my thing, and you've seen that in a lot of my content, and I have a whole video on protein. But in case you didn't know, protein is anti-catabolic, so it helps you keep your muscle, especially when you're a calorie deficit. It has a high thermic effect, so the more protein that you eat, the more calories you're going to burn per day, more so than if you were to eat carbs or fats. Every nutrient has a thermic effect, but proteins is by far the highest. Protein also helps to increase satiety, which is going to help you to stay in a deficit without getting excessively hungry, because it's going to help suppress your appetite. And then when you work out, you're gonna break down muscle tissue. So protein, you need it every single day for recovery. And then your body does actually need the amino acids that protein breaks down into for it to have an optimal immune system, for many of your neurotransmitters and more. So very important that your protein is always high. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to go a bit deeper into why carbs need to be low when fats are high and vice versa. So if you consume too many fats and carbs together, your calories are going to be too high and you're not going to be in a deficit anymore. It's interesting because fat has the most calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram. Protein carbs only have 4. You may already know this. So if you're eating, high carb on the day where you're eating high fat, all the surplus calories you're eating from fat are easily going to get stored as fat because you're spiking your insulin, you're getting yourself in a calorie surplus while all those fats are in your system. They're going to store very easily as fat. When you eat a high fat day, you have to be in a deficit because fat is the easiest nutrient for your body to convert into fats and sugars. Versus if you eat complex carbs with low fats, even if you were to eat in a slight surplus, it's more likely to use them for energy and recovery. And as I mentioned, fat needs to be low when carbs are high because carbs add volume. You're going to be very full. It could also interfere with digestion, and fat adds too many calories. As I mentioned, high insulin plus high fat is going to make more of your dietary fat get stored as body fat. There are actually studies where they had women consume a 50% calorie surplus. One group, so basically if they were only burning 1,500 calories a day, they were fed 2,250 calories a day. So that's 750 surplus. Now, I don't remember the exact numbers. I just remember it was a 50% surplus. Half the women, or a percentage of the women, were given a high-fat diet. A percentage of them were given a high-carb diet. And what they did was they put, it was considered it was called a metabolic tracer study, and Lane Norton has a video on this. But basically, they put, and I'm going to come off screen share just like so I can explain this to you visually, right? So they had the women who were eating 50% extra calories on a high-fat diet, and women who were consuming 50% extra calories above their maintenance on a higher carb diet. And in both groups, they put something inside of the fats and the carbs that they were consuming to see of the body fat that they gained from this calorie surplus, did it originate as carbs or did it originate as fats? And so what they found was that 98% of it originated as fat, which is crazy in both cases. So dietary fats are most easily stored as fat, but if you eat in a calorie surplus, you're going to gain fat regardless. And the way that it works is that, even if you're eating low fats but high carbs, the high carbs almost create a buffer so that those fats that then put you in the surplus get stored as fat, versus obviously if you're just eating high fats, those fats will just directly get stored as fat. I mean, they get directly stored as fat regardless. Honestly, just search up Lane Norton Metabolic Tracer Study. He explains the whole thing. I'm just remembering this off the cuff to help expand upon one of these points. But you can learn more about that from his video on that. Now, and then, like I said, when dietary fat is high, even if you only have a little bit of carbs, your fats are going to get stored as fat. I mean, even if you don't get any insulin spike, if you're in a calorie surplus and you have a bunch of fats in your system, those fats are going to get stored as fat. And if you're in a calorie surplus and you don't have a lot of fats in your system, but you have a lot of carbs in your system, all the fat is going to get stored as fat. Not a lot of the carbs are going to get stored as fat. A lot of them get used for energy, but whatever fats you consume on top of that when you're in a surplus from high carbs is going to get stored as fat. And that's why when people are lean bulking, I tend to keep their fats very low and get the surplus simply from complex carbs and lean proteins, because that way they're going to gain less fat, versus if somebody's in a surplus from just pure fats and they're trying to bulk, they're going to gain a lot more body fat. So next up, so at this point, low insulin allows the body to burn fat efficiently. I mean, it's really about being in a deficit, of course. So it really ties in more with this point right here. And then obviously when we're getting in the carbs, we want the glycogen uptake to happen. So, don't worry about this too much. If you're in a deficit, whether it's high fat or high carb, as long as you're in a deficit, you're going to lose fat. And likewise, if you're in a surplus, regardless if it's high fat or high carb, actually the high carb is less likely for you to store as much fat. But again, that was the point I was making previously. Digestive efficiency. So I'm going to simplify all this stuff down and just say, if you eat a lot of fat and carbs together, it's a lot of work for your pancreas to create all those enzymes to digest both. And even what I've noticed is that a lot of the starchy carbs will absorb some of the fats in your gut. And then you just have all these bloated carbs that are loaded with oil and fat trying to pass through your digestive system. It's very hard to digest. Your body ends up having a lot of issues. Okay. Now, this point right here, high carbs can blunt testosterone boost from healthy fats. Don't worry about that. That's not really something significant that you need to worry about. So versus on the high carb days, we don't need fat to get the leptin and thyroid benefits we're looking for. But don't worry, if you have high carbs and healthy fats together, you're still going to get the fats in, so you're still going to get the testosterone boost. It would really be if you just give yourself chronic inflammation, mess up your energy levels, everything that could have a negative effect. But again, we just want to avoid the bloating in the first place. And then the last point is that when your fat is high and your carbs are low, your body's going to use those dietary fats for energy, which is going to improve metabolic flexibility. As we already mentioned, it's going to increase insulin sensitivity. And eventually, once your body gets used to using those fats for energy, you'll have pretty stable energy, which is cool. And then, of course, when we're eating the carbs, you want your body to use those efficiently, to absorb them efficiently, to store only glycogen to the muscles, but not spike your insulin while there's fats in your system, so you're getting optimal recovery and glycogen uptake. So I know that was really complicated. If you're a beginner, I probably already lost you. But what I want you to understand is that if you're already dialed in, if you're an advanced lifter, if you're getting under 12 to 15% body fat, especially using my typical low-fat strategies, then we might need to increase your fast and get you doing some higher fat, lower carb days. And then when we have you doing the higher carb days, we're going to need to drop the fats, and that's going to be on the days where you have a lot of sports, a lot of performance, whatever it might be. Okay, and I already went through quite a few examples, and I don't want to make this video more overwhelming than it already was. But if you're relatively new or easily overwhelmed, there's no need to overcomplicate things. You don't necessarily have to do carb cycling. It's more so a strategy that you can use if you're advanced to help take things to the next level and avoid some of the side effects of going too low in fats when you're really lean and you've been doing it chronically for a long time. So I hope that makes sense. Let me know what questions you guys have. I hope I didn't raise more confusion than how much I clarified here, because it was a lot of information. But any points you want me to clarify, let me know. When in doubt, keep it simple. But if you do want to actually like start doing some carb cycling, try some of these ideas. Let me know what questions you have in the comments, and I'll answer them, inshallah. And then I'll attach 2 relevant videos up here. See you guys in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.